I'd like to welcome everyone. What does the guest book say? I don't even know. We have Bob and Carol Bahney.
Yeah,
Just two guests, okay. All right. Bob, I grew up close to Bahney's greenhouse. And one day when Bob was paying his taxes, I said to him, why don't we have celery that tasted as good as when I grew up? And he started to explain to me the intricate and the labor-intensive job that his grandparents went through to raise good, sweet, light-colored celery. It wasn't the dark, bitter stuff that my husband lets lay at home. He only eats the white stuff. I just found it so interesting what he was telling me. And he didn't want to come tonight, but I coaxed him. So I'm sure he'll do just fine. And we'll introduce Bob and his wife, Carol.
This is the only good picture I have of my grandfather. That's the one sitting on the log there. That's Harry Bahney. No, I don't know where to go from here. Now, I'm probably going to say a lot of things that might not interest or might not pertain to this, but this is 65 years ago that I'm trying to remember this. And all the time, I can't remember from the kitchen to the living room. But I tried to remember stuff that my dad told me. Now, he's been dead 20-some years. I should have paid attention more, should have sat down and talked more. Whether I would have forgot it or not, I don't know. But anyhow, we're going to try to, if anybody has any questions along the way, just stop me, because there's only so much information I have here. So, yeah, are these going to be in order now?
There's, however she scanned them, that's the way they came up. And you want to pause that?
Okay,
Pause.
Pause it. You want to read it? This was a clipping out of the paper.
Okay.
Now, there is, on the left-hand side and the bottom, that's my grandfather, and on the right, it's my dad. And I think I wrote, how old they were at that time. I'll get to it.
You want the year? You want the year that this article was written?
I think it was 1950.
1950, yes. Yes. Let's see if we have enough light here. He asked me to read this. It says, farm grows only celery. Bahney's produce 110,000 stalks. Raising 110,000 stalks of celery annually is a year-round job for Charles and Harry Bahney, Elizabethville celery growers. They raise the seedlings and plants on a 3-acre farm on the outskirts of town and market the crop on the farm. This year they have had the assistance of Norm Barry, 27, of Elizabethville, who is a veteran in on-the-farm training. Harry Bahney began raising celery 15 years ago, and his son Charles, also a veteran in farm training, is following in his footsteps. The Bahneys, in growing their own seeds, select the best plants each year and replant them for seed. It takes 2 years to grow the seed. The seed is planted from late January into March so that plants will develop for cutting from time to time. The celery plants are irrigated and a 5-10-10 fertilizer is used. When all the stalks have been cut, the plot is plowed and ryegrass sown as a cover crop. This is plowed under in the spring and becomes fertilizer. Blight is a serious disease on celery plants, and the Bahneys spray Bordeaux mixture regularly for control measures. DDT also is used every week during the growing season. Boards 8 inches wide are used to whiten the celery. Keeping celery through the winter is only a matter of trenching, covering with soil, and roofing paper and straw. Last year was a tough year for the Bahneys. The celery hearts rotted, and they thought a disease had hit the plants. They carried the stalks and leaves off to the mountains so that the disease wouldn't spread. Later they found the trouble was the summer heat. So this year the outside stalks and leaves will be buried and used as fertilizer. All of the Bahney's celery, called summer passable, is sold at the farm to hucksters and stores who call for the celery. Retail price is 30 cents a bunch, usually 1.5 pounds containing 2 stalks.
Okay, where do we go to get started?
Play down at the bottom there.
Now, I don't remember exactly when my grandfather closed this up. But I'd say it was in the late 50s, and then my dad took it over, but I don't think he grew celery. He just grew the potted plants. And there was that much work involved and couldn't get anybody to work, I guess, so he had it for 2 or 3 years, and then he closed it up and went working elsewhere. But prior to that, because this here, I think, is when my dad owned it. This was what, 19? Did it have a date on there somewhere?
Here, let's see it.
Yeah, I thought it said 1950. Or 1962.
That's
Yeah, it's supposed to be called in that.
Okay, you can use the back button up there, right there.
Maybe somebody else needs to this thing.
Go again, click it again. There. Pause.
Yeah, I'm really good at this.
Carol,
Screen's too big. Yeah, here, you work it. Hold it there. Okay. That building up to the right, that's where the memorial place, the tombstone place is now, across from Kissy's. You remember that? He bought that because we didn't have enough room to store all the bleacher boards and everything, so he bought that building. And I can remember there was a lot of horse stuff in there, harnesses and stuff still in there. Cook owned that, where, you know, anybody know where Stanley Johns lives? Oh, yeah, okay. So they cemented it and rented it out to the Farm Bureau. Put up in the back there is where we stored all the stuff from the greenhouse, celery planter and all that kind of stuff. And down here you can actually see, this is actually my backyard. Yeah, there where that post is sitting, that's this road that goes down to the post office now. But there you can see how he wrapped the celery to blanch it, bleach it. We had a discussion about that. There, everywhere you look, they say blanch. Blanching is something I always thought you did when you froze something. Bleaching is when you shut the sunlight off, and that's what you did when you wrapped paper around it or when you put boards up against it. And that's what made the celery sweet and took some of the bitterness out of it. And also turned it yellow. Okay. Supposedly that building is down in Lancaster somewhere. They tore it down and rebuilt it and built it back up in Lancaster. I don't know that for sure, never saw it, but.
Do have a question. Is that known as the mule barn also?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where he stored, over here in the left door there, that was all stalls where he had the horses in. And then straight back up through there, it was, well, there was stalls there for mules. But that was all dirt when we got it. And I guess that was the office there. I mean, my dad said he remembers Cook had a truck that was chain drive. It was that old, you know, that's when he drove the old vehicles. Other than that, I can't tell you a lot about it, but we rented a lot of it out to, well, we rented some of it to Earl Klinger. They rented it for a while, but then Earl ended up buying it.
Okay.
Well, not Earl, but who had it now? Not the Amish.
Hoover.
Not Hoover.
Owen.
Owen actually.
And Trinity bought the upper part of it. Trinity Methodist bought the upper part of it. Yes, it went the whole way back to the alley, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, if you,
Yes,
Go-
and they
go
bought
back
part
once.
of that as well.
they did what?
They bought part of that as well. Owen was a member and
Yeah,
he
it was-
bought it and we
Yeah,
put a parking lot in there.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You know, you can see that part, the building runs this way.
Mm-hmm.
That was where we stored our stuff back up
Okay.
in there. The rest of it was basically the barn. That was, the back part I think was added on later on, the way it looked.
Yeah.
And that was like 2 stories. And this is gonna jump around because
We're,
a long time ago. Okay, this is when this is where it started, but actually, my dad told me out on Buttonwood Street, going down toward the high school, my grandfather rented a place there, and that's where he actually started a greenhouse back in there. Now, I never saw it, no pictures of it or anything like that, but then this was built, I just saw a picture of the barn there, 1932. My dad was 8 years old, so that would have been 1929 when the house was built. But you can see those things out here, they were hot bands or cold frames. I'll go into explaining what they were for before, but this is the only part of it. Now, go ahead, next picture.
Bob, isn't part of that your present garage?
Huh?
Isn't part of that your present shop and garage?
Yeah, the half right here, the front half, and that part over there is the one. that's
Yeah, there was
back
no
down.
street there yet. And Romberger's house, Rom would be over here.
Right,
Yeah.
Rummy would be behind the chimney there.
Yeah.
Now, later on, he built all that together.
Yeah.
You know, where I had my machine shop and stuff in there. Yeah. Okay. Now that's basically the same thing. Want to get, we'll get another picture. Go ahead. Okay, hold it. Okay, that was 1950. Does it look like Broad Street was blacktop? The alley down across there that goes over to the post office wasn't there yet. You know, it just stopped at the barn there. The alley going down through is not there. But those beds that you see here, they're more or less what they call cold frames now. They had big lights in them that they turned on when it got cold, but when they get the plane started, and she knows more about all this stuff, hardening them off out in the weather. They took all the plants out there and then put sash in there and covered that. They were like little greenhouses. Every day they had to lift those sash off and put them on a pile so it wouldn't burn. This is what I'm getting into, where there's a heck of a lot of work to this thing. And you can see some of the celery there, but I don't know at the time if he owned a big lot over there or not. But from the end of the phone company, where the post office is now, that was our celery, that was one of the big celery fields.
It was prior to 1950 though. Because this is 1950.
Right,
So-
but I don't know if he had that whole field out at that time. He might have, but there's just no way. I have no picture of it for sure. But yeah, you can see there now how the buildings are joined together. You build that other half, or part onto it. And up here on the top, I'm gonna get in the room. But up on the peak of the, you see there's little windows that are ventilators, they're called ventilators. And if you know the new greenhouse down where you get to Millersburg there, all that is automated now in that greenhouse. All the, here, you had to be with it all the time. You married this business when it was growing season. If you didn't open those ventilators, you burned everything up. Okay, so you had to be there all the time to crank open those ventilators and put a big fan at the end then too. And then there was heat, big pipes that ran on each side of the greenhouse to heat it. But this all started, what did I say, January? They started planting in January already, getting the soil ready and stuff like that. And I read different things in a book here that he had wrote, that they had to spread the ground out in the greenhouse because sometimes it was too wet that they couldn't do anything with it. Now they made a screener, a sieve or whatever to sieve the ground, and all this stuff they made by hand. But it had a screen on the top, and then it came down to a screen on the bottom, and then it had a chopper up at the top that broke it up, and then it went down through, and that's how they screened the dirt to put it in the plant. And they were planted in what they called flats. They were board. I don't have any. Yeah.
Bob, was that was their full-time job?
Huh?
That was their full-time job?
Whose?
Your grandfather and your father?
Yeah. Well, my dad, I guess the way, I had another book, but I couldn't find it, where he was doing this when he was in school, and they must have had like an ag in school, but he had a ledger where he said he put so many plants out and it did that and did this. And I don't know if he actually did it or if he was helping my grandfather doing it, but then he worked on the railroad for 2 years before he went in, got drafted in the service. And then he got hurt there and he came back, and my grandfather talked him into going in the greenhouse business with him again. And I don't know for sure what year that was, but probably 1945. And well, okay, yeah. Now this thing here, I built from memory. Everybody see it? We didn't have plastic pots. These are the pots they made. It's out of roofing felt, or sheeting, or whatever. And you put this, you took a piece like this, and like I said, I made one for her because she started all the, she really got along real good with my grandfather. She started all kinds of plants in the cellar. And you put this piece of paper in here and wrap it. Right there is a little steel plate. Now you take this and you fold that paper. Well, you stick this thing down over, then you fold the paper over, and you put a piece of cardboard underneath there first before you start folding it over, and then you put a number 2 tack in there and hit it, and it bends it over and makes it a top. But she was sort of afraid of the petroleum in it, you know, so I'm going to keep a guy from I Maybe they didn't use the same thing. You know better about that.
That would have been real tar, Bob. That wouldn't have been synthetic tar.
Well, that's it.
Different
That
story.
was a lot thinner, the stuff that
Yeah.
I couldn't even buy this stuff. But anyhow, and this, I might as well show you this. This was what my aunt and a whole bunch of other people delivered celery to Millersburg and all the adjacent towns around. They load that up with these celery and take it around door to door and sold it like that. I still have one of these left yet. Okay. You read how many celery plants there was. Can you imagine planting them by hand? It's not like throwing a corn in there and picking it over. You got that on your hands and knees, or you gotta go back and bend over and plant it. I can't explain much about the celery planter, other than the one we had was not like, this was big iron wheels on it. And you sat on the back and you went backwards. And you scored a line in the field with the tongue there, laid that in the tongue, and that's what followed it out through the field. Now this had about a 55-gallon drum of water in it. But this thing, the best way I can explain it, it was similar to this. It had an O-ring on it. You laid the celery stalk in here like this, and when it came around, it hit a can that pinched that shut. And that went down in to where it plowed it. And then the reason these are tapered like this, is they packed the dirt back down against the stalk after the plow, after the celery was in place. So you had to sit there, and you had a flat, and you had to get these celery stalks in here, pick them apart, and lay them in there as that went around. And I did it as a kid, and I got yelled at a few times. I might have missed one or didn't get it in the right depth. My grandfather was very particular. We plant, I'm always put string lines up for the rows. She says it doesn't matter. She does a good job straight, but that I got from him. He put string lines on everything. Those rows are as straight as an arrow. But that there is self-propelled. So at the end, you had to walk it around to the next row then. The tractor made the rows in the field. Now we owned another celery field. People that know where on Broad Street down in West Broad, where the storage buildings are. Leon Dockey built it, a house there. That was our celery field, that whole lot. He bought it and they filled it in and put a house there. But the celery planter was really heavy, and we had no trailer, so they made a sled to load this on. But it had steel cleats on it. You couldn't drive it, it went that slow. You just had to drag it down the street with a tractor. This girl would let you do that with me now, would they?
Absolutely.
You could always see the marks on the road where, ground to move off. Okay, that's enough of that. It's just hard to find. Yeah, there's an earlier picture of that. That's small. Okay, now that Marilyn found. Yeah, you put your cursor up there. Put it up to the house, up there, Dad's house.
Dad's house. Oh,
Dad's house up there, right there. That's Marilyn's dad's place, one of the first. And Baker is to the left, and Hens, was it Hens?
Hassinger.
Hassinger. And now you can see here where the greenhouse is, down there. And that field there, I do not know if that was celery that he had in there before he put the big patch in. I don't know that for sure. I guess said, there's so much that I should have sat down and asked, you know, but, you know, you think those days are never gonna end, and that information's gonna always be there, but it's not. There's nobody, and if anybody actually knows anything more about
So that field is Clearfield Street now.
Now,
That's North Street, Clearfield Street.
yeah.
Right at the garage
Right
there.
at Jakey's place, or
Yeah,
that's Clearfield,
yeah.
And what's the alley behind our place?
Monroe,
Monroe.
Monroe. And you can see the long building here now, the mule barn.
Yeah, the cook, and there's Kissy's, well, that's still there too. But at one time, my dad could have bought that whole field for $4,000, and my grandfather said, what do you want that for? But, you know, back then the lots would probably only cost $100. You know, when that was, he never bought it. But he did buy that field, and
So Bob, when you were at the Heights doing all of this, they were, your family. When your family was at the Heights of doing this, they were only doing celery.
no.
The other stuff came later?
No.
Oh, no. Okay.
I would say that he started, yeah, I didn't even get into that. Well, those pots that I was saying, by the way, he grew a couple places in here where I saw where they transplanted, they potted tomatoes, 21,000 and 45,000. Cabbage plants and all that stuff that they would start this stuff in what they call a flat with a wooden box like this, and then they had a board with a whole bunch of pegs in it, sharpened pegs, and they set that down into the dirt, and that's where they put their seed in. And a lot of those, like the celery, that didn't have to be replanted. That just grew up to the height where it was ready to go out in the field. You know, had to be put out in hot beds, probably to harden it, but
Talk about the boards you said, they had long
yeah,
boards.
so that's getting into bleaching the
Bleaching
celery,
it.
blanching it.
Blanching it.
But I think it's what, 2 or 3 weeks, and you put these boards up against it. Now they were 8-inch wide boards, about 16 foot or 12, 14 foot long. They had to be hauled out in that field and rolled out on rollers and put up against the celery stalks. And then there was a wire clamp that went down over it like that. And I saw here where they just had 400 and some of those boards. Because they probably it was planted at different intervals. So they went along and planted it, you know, and moved the bleacher boards. So, and then they had to put irrigation up for the celery. Celery took an awful lot of water. And they say, 90% of it's water, I guess. And that was done with vertical pipes that went up, and there was a wide thing with rollers on it that the long 3/4 inch pipe went out through with nozzles in it, every 3 foot. And as it went, these oscillators, there was like a little turbine in there, and they kept going back and forth, and then this would ratchet every so often like this. Like that, and that's how they irrigated that field. And you irrigated it until the water ran out on the road. That was when you knew you had enough water on it. But it took a tremendous amount of water. And they had to do the same thing down on Broad Street too. But I remember as a kid, it was a big thing for me to drive the tractor and, you know, plow the field, and the sprayers. I remember the sprayers, all that stuff they build themselves. Like that sieve that I was telling you about, they made an ice crusher. And if I remember correctly, does anybody ever remember an ice house up in Lycans?
Yes, sir.
Was it back where you turn back to the park, or to the dance hall?
No, it was over on the other side.
On the other side?
Yeah.
Is this a
You
cement
know where
block
the
building?
building is now that was the bowling alley? It
Yeah.
was down behind there.
And it was just a small
Yes,
cement building.
yes.
And I think it was had sawdust in it or something. But I remember you used to go in there and get they were in big blocks.
Yep.
That's how we got our ice. This is going back again to the celery. I'm jumping around here a lot. Huh? Yeah, but I don't want to say any more about the grading. Other than the fact that they grew all their own tomato plants, flower plants, any flower plant that you can think about. They probably grew geraniums. We used to cut the geraniums and hang them in under my front porch over the winter. And they kept there and the heat did cuttings off. You know, now you start your stuff from cuttings. But
What did you use the ice for?
well, that's going back to the celery again. But I was gonna say, all the vegetable plants and stuff were usually sold out by the 3rd of May. And one year, my dad said they got a bad frost on the 30th. And when you go back to the greenhouse picture, those hotbeds, a lot of the stuff was out in those hotbeds and they froze. So they lost all that. The ice crusher, that they made by hand, that was just a motor on it with a big round drum on it with cleats on it. And you push down through it, chop these big blocks of ice up. And they hauled that down to Lebanon, was one of the places we got rid of. The celery was in the boxes about that big, about that high, heavy. I remember them used to haul it in an old Studebaker truck up over Gold Mine Mountain. If you didn't make the turn. My grandfather was never good at double clutching into low gear and he missed it, so they had to go all the way back down the mountain again. And back up around that hard turn. It was just a little 6-cylinder in it. But anyhow, we dropped that off in the middle of the night in Lebanon. And Harrisburg, I'm gonna say it, I don't know why, I think it's Banana and Fruit Company on 2nd Street.
Santana.
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 Santana?
Yeah, it's actually behind the Historical Society on Front Street. When you follow that all the way back, you're now on 2nd Street.
Okay.
And that's where
that was another place where
they
we
back
sold
up to the Historical
bulk
Society.
celery to big company, you know, other than the fact that, you know, celery around here. Yeah.
Could I ask where your water source came from?
Pardon?
Your water source for all that water that you irrigated with?
The town water,
Okay, wow.
they had a 2-inch water line running over, and, who was on the water company? Works?
Jane.
And I know my grandfather said, can you supply me with enough water? And he said, yep, don't worry about it, I gave you enough water. It
Wow.
took a lot of water. I remember that, that's. Well, yeah, that those big boxes out there down there, they packed that with ice, put it in the celery. You know, and going back to the celery, if you cut all the green stuff off of celery today, or you buy the celery hearts, which aren't true celery hearts that you buy, that's what we sold, only the hearts. All the stuff that you're buying now laid out in the fields, except for the hearts. That's all they ever sold, they never sold. But this is, I was reading that the celery today is a new type of celery. It's self-bleaching, blanching. You didn't have to put bleacher boards up or anything like that. It shuts it. And didn't you say that celery got a disease? We tried to grow it and it died on us. There's some kind of disease in the old celery that it just, we couldn't grow it. Now down in Lancaster, you can still buy this celery that we used to grow. And it's just a stalk about that round, a couple pieces in it, and it has a strong, not bitter, but a stronger celery taste to it than this stuff does now. It's, I would say it's not quite as mild, but it tastes like celery rather than just biting into something.
The Amish use that for their wedding meals down there.
Do they?
Celery. And
Bob
every-
uses
every
it, he
wedding.
uses it as margaritas.
And going back to this picture.
Bloody Marys, I mean.
This picture here, that was Jack Wells, used to be the town cop, remember? Anybody that's old enough to remember that? And the other guy's Ralph Rebo. His dad had Romantic Sixes in it. That was a golf station, paint shop, and a garage. That was his dad. This was Ralph Jr., and that's my grandfather there. And that little cooler sitting to the right of there in his back is still up in my attic. Right away. But that was on one of the fishing trips. Sassafras River in Maryland, I guess it was. And that was Tom, you wrote that. Yeah. Okay, that was, where are you going next? Oh. Yeah, here, April 20th, they potted 75,000. No, 75. This is back in 1945. This is where they transplanted the celery, 60,000. They had to transplant that celery too, after the cut. And even transplanting was in the field. But I can remember when they got the celery planted, that was a big deal. I mean, compared to, well, you can imagine doing that by hand. You know, like I said, it wasn't like planting corn where you lay the seed down there and kick the dirt over. You had to get down and tap that in there, and that celery planter did all that.
Could I ask, like, where your grandfather started? Did he have background in that, or did he just?
Well, yeah, I didn't get into that. Like I said, I'm gonna jump around here. He went to 4th grade in school, 9 years old. He went out, they called them hirelings, went out and worked on a farm. Because his dad got killed in a mine, they had a big family, he had to do that to support the family. So that's the education he had, 4th grade. And you can see here in a lot of his notes, he always pronounced cantaloupe, cantaloupes. And when he wrote it in there, you know, it's just, you can tell by the way he, you know, that he only had a 4th grade education. But I often wonder, other than the Farm Bureau, it's not like getting on a computer today and finding information out. How did he know, who taught him all, or, you know, where did he find the information out? If he had blight or if he had certain kind of disease on the celery, how did he treat it? I know there was bluestone, there was sulfur, stuff like that, but I don't know who knew all that stuff. I guess the Farm Bureau, I don't know. But, you know, now you can jump on the computer and find it out, everything, but.
So he was self-taught.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think, well, there's nobody, like I said, his dad was killed, you know, when he was 9 years old, so nobody taught him. He just, for some reason or other, decided he was gonna have a little greenhouse. And through all this, he made, he worked at Schwab's, of the Schwab's Wagon Company. But you remember, he made the spokes for the wagons. Spokes, he ran a machine up there. But he did that and then built the greenhouse part-time. Now, he didn't build the house. That was built by my grandfather, my other grandfather, my mom's dad. When my dad was 9 years old, after they got together and got married. And my grandfather in Forney in Berrysburg, he had an apple peach orchard. You know where Weaver's Garage is, before you go into Berrysburg, left-hand side? That was all our apple peach orchard, my other grandfather. But he was a carpenter that built it, the house for this grandfather. And that's the house I'm living in now. I was born there. Whether I'll die there or not, I don't know. But I lived there for 2 years till the house was built in Berrysburg, and then I was over there so the days of coming over here, I'd come over with my dad and spend the day over here doing stuff, and we'd always go to the hotel and get an egg sandwich in the morning. I remember that. I'm still trying to make an egg sandwich that tastes as good as it did when Squirrely Schaefer was the cook. I don't know if anybody heard of him. Remember him, Dennis? You remember him?
I do.
Yep. Okay.
Any tended warrant to lead you.
That is.
You know, when I was maybe 10 years old, I'm Jim Roddenbush,
Okay.
and I lived out on East Main Street, and we'd come over there, and this was I thought in the winter time, I can't remember, but the celery was maybe this high, and these boards just walking down the roads. And why did you plow that up like that? Did you put the celery in the big furrows?
Was there dirt plowed up against it?
I can't remember that. All I remember is this board in there and the
The
celery.
boards. You're saying the boards? That was the bleaching. Or
Because the
blanch,
sun
whichever.
science and
That's what made the celery sweeter, took the bitterness out of it, and also made it light in color. Now, the new celery they have is self-bleaching, blanching. It turns white on the inside on its own. It's a special, they made the seeds that way or whatever. It does it on its own without putting that paper around it. You can wrap newspaper around it. There toward the end, they started using paper on rolls, and then you roll the paper on it and feed it together all the way. Instead of using those big boards, that was a lot of work.
Basically, what you're doing is just stopping the sunlight
Right.
to hit it.
And this is where I'm saying, how everybody is so correct on what they're saying. Maybe they're afraid somebody will put Clorox in the celery to bleach it, that they don't say bleaching anymore. But bleaching is when you shut the sunlight off. If you lay a tarp on the grass and it gets yellow, you shut the sun off, and that's what that did. I don't know, blanching was for freedom. Anyhow, the same thing. Now, they had celery into December. I didn't get into that. They called that trenching. You dug a trench, hacked the celery in there with straw and covered it with canvas, piled dirt on top of it. I remember one Thanksgiving, we were having Thanksgiving dinner, I think in Berrysburg, and it started snowing. So we went out and cut the celery and put it into those trenches and covered it up. They already had the trenches made, but they had to put it in there and cover it up so it wouldn't freeze. Or frost, I guess, with the snow on top of it. But I was reading here that would keep till well into January. They'd dig it up and then you'd be able to sell it, that way.
But when we were kids, it was Larry Shoup and Carl Zerfing. We lived at the east end of town, and I think we'd be back there eating celery. I think we went in there and just picked it off from the stalk.
I don't quite remember a lot of that for
You
sure.
owing 30 cents.
We used to call it raiding gardens.
That spray was pretty powerful. They used that, always called it bluestone, I guess it's, what was it actually called?
DDT.
Huh?
It was DDT.
No, it wasn't that though. Bluestone, yeah, they did use that, but anyhow, I remember carrying it. It didn't have a shirt on it. At the end of the day, it had burnt blisters on me from copper sulfate. Was bluestone it was called. But that was mixed in to spray the celery, I think for light or something.
Well, when we lived down on East Main Street, I remember a huckster wagon coming by, and he'd be hauling bananas and oranges, and he probably had vegetables on there from Europe.
Yeah.
Someplace. I don't know who that guy was, but he was really hollering bananas and oranges, and people would just
Well,
stop
You
him.
remember Ohlers?
Oars, yeah.
Ohlers, they used to sell our celery.
Oh,
And Diddy, there was a Diddy that used to sell it. And who in Millersburg, I don't know. But I know my Aunt Eva, my grandmother's sister, she used to take it down because she was only the one person that had a car at that time. She'd take the celery to Millersburg in those crates there, and they walk down the street and sell that celery. But, you know, there was always somebody home back in those days, you know, not everybody did work like you do now. I mean, not females.
Bob, so this, your grandfather actually started this when, early 40s, or was before?
Well, if you go back and look at that picture of the greenhouse, can you go back there?
Just go ahead, because you're already back.
There?
Okay, there. That's 1950. So everything was built. You can see how big the trees are there on the left-hand side already. The barn there, I just looked tonight, my grandfather did the cementing, and 1931 was when that part of the barn was built. And that was built after the house. The house was built, what did I say, 29? The house was built in 29. So he built that part back there. And they used to, they would raise pigs in that barn on the bottom of it.
So when do you think he actually started the business for the minutes here?
Was it before they built the house? Was it in the 20s?
Out on Broad Street, maybe there in Buttonwood Street, you know, where he lived
Yeah.
before. My dad said something about him having a greenhouse there. But I don't know if he was in business to sell it or what he did.
Yeah.
But when he come out here, so this is 29. I mean, you can see everything is fully built, or everything is built at this point.
And your dad was born, what, 1911? Your dad, around 1910, 1911?
What, he was born
Your father, yeah, as a timeline.
20
21.
21 he was born.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was, on that thing there, he was,
He didn't build it.
Huh?
That has to be mid-30s,
this. Well, yeah, those, what I can see, those look like 49 or 50 Studebakers. So they never bought a new car, so I would say that had to be the 30s. Or, yeah, no, it's not, it was 1950, but when he started those earlier pictures of just the house,
He must have started that during the Depression. That's how it sort of adds up.
yeah,
He had a lot of time in his hands.
because he was, my grandfather was in the First World War. And, but like I said, I don't know, because I think in that picture that you have there, Marilyn,
He wasn't given any.
at that picture there of with them sitting in the celery field, my grandfather was 58 years old at that time, in 1950, and my dad was 29. So they were about 30 years old when they had my dad. You know, they were late in life. And I was reading something else, and I said to her tonight, something about, I don't know, some people remember Frank Reed. He had a dump truck. Said something about him dumping 5 tons of, sounded to me like it was manure. But I can sort of remember walking into the greenhouse and smelling this, because I think this is how they prepared the soil back in December and January and dried it, because they, in this book here, it wrote, we had to spread soil out on the greenhouse floor, which was all dirt, because it wasn't the right, it wasn't dry enough to plant or to run through the singers, so they could make, you know.
Yeah.
But it was, what happened is it just got to be so much work. I mean, you can imagine, you know, when you don't have a lot of people to help you, or today everything's automated, they got everything down to a science.
Well, when you planted that celery, how far apart were those stalks when you put them in the ground?
I was trying to look that up too. I would say the wheels on the celery planter were probably 8 inches apart.
Interesting.
And the rows were big enough to get the tractor through it. I think it might have skipped. There was on the tractor, there was a long bar on it with 3 plows on it when you plowed it, for the tongue of the celery planter to lay in. So there was probably more room at some places, because when you went through the sprayer, you had to have room for your tire tracks, you know, that you didn't crush the celery. So you might have had 4 or 5 rows that were closer, and then the space, you know, they had all that figured out. But yeah, it was, and then they would, I remember cultivating it, you know, you went along with it, that was done with the tractor. But prior to that, it was done by hand. I still have some of them old cultivators up there where you push them, you know. Well,
Are there any more questions?
any more questions? Any questions?
No, I think you covered everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, the trenching, the bleaching, blanching, let me make sure. Did that say about how much the celery was?
Yeah, 30 cents.
Yeah, here's a bunches, $1.95. 1 to 1 1/4 pounds was $1.35. I have it here on that. That was the same thing as that one. Yeah, just like here that I found in this book, transplanted 23,000 cabbage plants. So they did more than just celery. You know, like I said, those hotbeds and stuff were all filled with those flats. And they get them out, and that's when they bring them into the greenhouse. Oh, and then they set up a, right about in this part of the building, they had a wash bench. And I can remember my dad had a big apron on it, but all the celery that they cut out in the fields, they cut into the small pieces. But then he brought it in and washed it all. You know, with a hose just hanging there, and they washed it all, every one of them, and then weighed them and stuff, then put rubber bands around every one.
Yeah.
And I still, I don't know if, probably 65 years old, I have rubber bands that are still good. I can't buy rubber bands like that anymore, from when we used to bunch the celery together. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, maybe there's somebody has, remembers more about it than me.
When did they blacktop Broad Street? When was blacktop put on Broad Street?
When? I don't know. Don't know when they blacktopped.
I think that was done in the 50s based upon when those houses were built.
Because it doesn't look like it's, I'd say it's not blacktop there, is it? But you know, my neighbor, Fred Wren, tells me this story, that when they heard that they were gonna blacktop Broad Street, my grandfather immediately put the sidewalk in. So he would have this much of the land. If you take notice, Fred don't have that much land. Fred tells me that story. I don't know whether that's true or not, I don't know. But
Story is right.
yeah, I don't know when, like I said, you can see those trees are pretty big, so, and that's 1950.
You just cut that corner tree down, didn't you? You ground the stump up.
All three of them.
Oh,
Well, there were three left here, and then there was one out in the middle of the field, or right here. There was one big oak tree right here, we cut that down too.
Yeah, that
But this one, and this one I just cut down. That was cut down years ago. And the way it looks, it's so much bigger because I think it was feeding in the sewer pipe. That I had to replace because it filled up with, you know, the roots got in.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.